Okay, we're going to talk about how to prepare to apply for a mortgage. And it's very important. This is going to be a series, so I'm going to cover as much as I can in a minute, and then I'll add to the series. And when we're finished and I finally have it all together, then you can kind of put it together yourselves of what you need. But first thing you got to think of when you're going to apply for a mortgage, you need a 2-year residence history where you've been living, and a 2-year work history where you've been working. Now you can have gaps in those employments or residence histories, but we need to make sure we fill them. So I was off for a couple of months. I was laid off. I went back to work, that kind of thing. Or I was in an apartment for a year. Then I lived with my parents for a year, or 6 months, and I went into another apartment for a year. So we just have to track all that together to make sure we have a 2-year residence history and a 2-year employment history. Make sure it's thorough. The biggest challenge we have in the mortgage industry is the mortgage application isn't complete. So make sure we get that information. And on the next series, we'll talk about income and assets. Okay, let's just recap a little bit. You want to apply for a mortgage, you need a 2-year residence history and a 2-year employment history. So expanding on that just a little bit. So you worked at, or you had a couple of places where you lived. You need the move in, move out dates, complete address, and what you were paying for rent. And if you were living rent free, that's okay. You just need a rent free letter from the owner of the property. So it has to come from the owner. It can't come, if there's a lessee in there, it's your mom and she's the lessee of the apartment or something like that, that'll work as well. But you got to concentrate on being an owner. And with with employment history, you have to remember that you have to have a 2-year history. Now, if you did have a gap, that's okay, but you still have to go back. So you're out for 2 months. Now you got to go back 26 months. You have you got to complete the 2-year work history, even though you're off. That's fine. So, and you also have to have start and stop dates, complete employment information, address, type of position that you were in, and the employment income. So make sure you get all that together. On the next one, we'll start talking about income and assets. Thank you. All right, today we're going to talk about assets. And so if you haven't figured out the theme yet, when you go to underwriting on a residential mortgage application or you're submitting one, they're going to go backwards. They're going to look back. They know what you're going to do going forward. They want to see what you've been doing. So same thing with asset statements. You need to provide 2 months most recent bank statements. And that's not a transaction history. There seems to be a lot of confusion in the mortgage industry with buyers and borrowers and refinancers. They don't understand what a transaction history is versus a bank statement. A transaction history just shows all your transactions. It doesn't provide any identifying information. A bank statement provides all the identifying information: the bank name, the customer's name, the account number, and all the activity in the account, the deposits, withdrawals, etc. So 2 months most recent asset statements are needed to qualify to cover your down payments and closing costs. All right, so this is the final part on being prepared to apply for a residential mortgage. So we're going to go back just remember 2. We're going to go back 2 years on your employment, 2 years on your residence history. And if you have more than one job, or you've worked at more than or lived at more than one residence, you need move in, move out dates for the residents and start and stop dates for the employers, and you need final pay stubs from those employers that you worked at. Self-employed is a little bit different, but if you have self-employed a different business, obviously you have to provide those tax returns if you changed businesses, and so you had 1 year at this business, the other year at that business. You still need 2 years. So 2 years employment, 2 years residence, 2 years banks, or 2 months bank statements, and a month's worth of pay stubs, and a couple of years of W-2s. All right, this will complete this one. We'll go on to the next one.